Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this hybrid event in the CICG in Geneva. This meeting is entitled Transformative Responses to Stem Advocacy of Hatred Based on Religion or Belief in the Context of Yemen. Welcome to everyone joining us online and offline. My name is Mirjam and I work for Jubilee campaign, and I will be moderating this event. This event will take about 1 hour until 2 o'clock. We have various speakers, and then we will have some time for questions and answers. I would like to notify people that the entire meeting is going to be translated in Arabic. So there is a button on Zoom where you can change English or to Arabic language. The organizations behind these events are Jubilee Campaign, Set My People Free, the Minority Council of Yemen, and ECLJ. I would like to give the floor now shortly to Mr. Kamal.
Yeah. Have this meeting today. Yemen has been in my heart for so long time, and in the last 2 years, it was the third in the Operation Open Door World Watch List, as the most persecuted Christians are there, and also this year it was the 5th in the whole world. And my experience there started in 2008 in one of my visits, when I met a Christian family. 3 generations they are Christians, but they cannot practice their faith freely. And so it is great that we have this meeting today to talk about the situation there and the need for the application of Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which gives freedom of thought, conscience, and belief to everyone. And so I hope that the meeting will give you an idea of the situation and to fulfill the dream of the Yemeni for freedom of thought and conscience and belief. So their dream is really to have a country where there is equality and justice. Because minorities in Yemen face discrimination, and they are kind of like second-class citizens. And one of the most laws which are violating freedom of thought and conscience and belief is the apostasy and blasphemy law in Islam. And in Yemen, they have death sentence for these two laws. And we would like these to be abolished, and really the minorities recognized, the different minorities which are there. And actually we formed a group, working group for religious freedom. Now it has been going on for the last 2 years, when I was approached by Musheer, who will be sharing today. He's one of the survivors. And they really want to see a council of minority recognized or registered for Baha'i, for Jews, and for marginalized, and also for the Christians. And they represent 25% of the population. So I hand over to the moderator to continue this, and their dream is really for all of them to be recognized and treated equally in their home country, Yemen, which they love very much.
Thank you, Kamal, for those passionate words. I have the honor to present to you the first speaker, the second speaker now, Ms. Nazila Ghanea. She's sitting right next to me. She is the United Nations Special Rapporteur for Freedom of Religion or Belief. Mrs. Nazila Ghanea assumed her mandate as a Special Rapporteur in August 2022. She is the Professor of International Human Rights Law and Director of the Masters of Science in International Human Rights Law at the University of Oxford. Mrs. Ghanea, thank you for coming, and I will pass you the microphone.
This invitation, it's a pleasure to be with the panelists here today and with those online. I want to extend my warmest appreciation to Jubilee Campaign for not only organizing this event, but carrying this issue forward in the Human Rights Council and in other fora. Of course, the topic that is under discussion today is the subject also of a report that will be presented later today to the Human Rights Council. How can we have transformative responses to the scourge of hatred on the basis of religion or belief, globally, but also in relation to Yemen? Regarding the global phenomenon of advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief, there are many trends that are very alarming around the world. The legal frameworks that we have the potential of assisting in our responses to it, but we do need to transform at its root religious or belief hatred around the world. But what are the root causes of hatred on the basis of religion or belief? What are its drivers? Why is it thriving so much around the world? And why is it alive and deteriorating in different contexts? I think what we need is a set of transformative tools that address not only the individual instances of hatred, but also, and discrimination, but also address it and prevent it from occurring. The first duty, of course, is on the state. The obligation is on the state to ensure that hatred is not fed and does not flourish. And non-state actors, though, also have a very important role to play. So it's the obligation of the state, but it is the responsibility also of all of us to play our role to prevent further violations. Yemen, regrettably, is a very concerning case study in relation to this subject. The situation is tragic, and of course it is complex. In a situation of protracted internal conflict and of course humanitarian disaster, the feeder, what drives hatred and allows it to flourish are more complex. Yet the importance of freedom of religion or belief is something that applies across the world. In Yemen, not only are people suffering for humanitarian and reasons of conflict, but there are many populations, and I was interested to hear the figure of 25%, many populations, because of their religion or belief, are suffering an additional burden. These rights violations against religious minorities are prevalent. Dozens have been subjected to disappearance, arbitrary detention, ill treatment, and prosecution on grounds of their religion or belief. And I just mean in recent weeks, let alone in recent years, where the numbers are far more alarming. We will hear more from experts with closer knowledge of the on-the-ground situation about of religious and belief minorities. But let me point also to some of the communications that have come to the mandate. So when communications come to the mandate, we ensure that there is the consent of the victim or victims, and then build up a legal case, regarding the rights that would have been violated in that instance, and we appeal to the state, and in this instance also the de facto authorities. We appeal to them to seek to remedy the violations. I think you know the allegation letters that have come through the special procedures, the mandates of the United Nations. They speak of a persistent pattern of persecution. One of them from June 2023 is one of the recent ones, and it was regarding the disappearance of the 17th members of the Baha'i community that had peacefully convened, and it was abruptly interrupted by Houthi actors. Previous to that, of course, the Houthi Grand Mufti of Sana'a had also accused the Baha'is of seeking to harm the country and calling for society and militias to unite against the beliefs that Baha'is uphold. There have been other communications that also relate to freedom of religion or belief, and this is not so much about religious minorities, but of violations that are carried out in the name of religion. Okay? So if a violation is carried out in the name of religion, but its result is the restriction or violation of human rights, that is also of concern to freedom of religion or belief mandate. So two of the communications today were about restrictions on women, including the prohibition of women from traveling without a mahram or a male guardian, prevention of women to reproductive health care, gender segregation in the workplaces, etc. The de facto authorities have referred to this as the protection of faith-based and national values. but the allegation letters point out to the whole range of rights that will be undermined as a result of it. Returning to the report today at the Council on advocacy of hatred based on religion or belief, there are sometimes positive examples to report, and there is sometimes evidence that international advocacy and efforts such as our gathering today can have a positive impact in at least reducing the suffering of religious and belief minorities and others. Nevertheless, those instances of transformation, addressing hatred at its roots, and a positive impact of advocacy are too far and far between. The report urges states to increase their support for local civil society organizations that advocate, local and international, civil society organizations that advocate on behalf of seeking to address and ensure the rights of minorities all around the world. It's important to document violations and build local capacity, and I commend your work in seeking exactly to ensure this. Measures to counteract violent and discriminatory narratives must be put in place around the world. Interreligious and interfaith dialogue is one of these efforts. The Minority Council is also a welcome opportunity to seek to ensure understanding and a better future for Yemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nazila, for your words. I now want to give. We now have a pre-recorded video of which will be shown on the displays, and on Zoom people can see it as well. It's pre-recorded by Susie Gelman. Susie Gelman is a graduate of Harvard University and Georgetown University Law Center, and currently is serving as the Commissioner of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USCIRF. USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan US federal government commission which monitors religious freedom violations globally. So I hope we will have the video showing soon.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share some brief remarks as part of this important event. I'm grateful to the conveners for holding this event to elevate the issue of religious freedom violations in Yemen, alongside this session of the UN Human Rights Council. I'm Susie Gelman, a commissioner at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF. As many of you know, USCIRF is an independent, bipartisan U.S. government advisory body created by the U.S. Congress in 1998. The Commission uses international standards, including the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to monitor freedom of religion or belief abroad and make policy recommendations to the U.S. President, State Department, and Congress. After nearly a decade of brutal war, religious freedom conditions in Yemen continue to worsen, especially in northern areas controlled by Ansar Allah, the Houthi rebel movement. With so much global attention on the Houthis in the wake of the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, the international community must work together to find new and creative ways to stem the violence and horrific violations the group is perpetrating against religious minorities in Yemen. The result of such violations is that religious minority life in Houthi-controlled areas faces near total extinction. Houthi authorities deploy an array of tools and tactics, including propaganda, indoctrination camps, and educational curricula to harass, defame, and incite violence against vulnerable faith communities. Houthi targeting of Jews, Baha'is, Christians, and non-believers has compelled many to flee to the south or leave Yemen altogether and seek refuge abroad. The few remaining members of each community often remain in hiding due to fears of harassment, intimidation, and violence. The Houthis have particularly targeted Yemeni Baha'is. Most Baha'is have fled Houthi territory to seek safety and refuge from persecution and hatred, such as propaganda branding them as infidels, enemies of Islam, and fugitives. In May of last year, 4 Houthi gunmen raided a peaceful community gathering in Sana'a, detaining 17 Yemeni Baha'is, including 5 women. Over the last few months, USCIRF has repeatedly and unequivocally called for the unconditional release of detained Baha'is in Yemen. Top U.S. government officials have also made such calls, and we've been encouraged by the release of several detainees. However, 5 Yemeni Baha'is continue to languish in Houthi prisons where they are subject to forced religious education. This kind of religious persecution extends well beyond the Baha'i community. Yemen's Jewish community, one of the world's oldest with its own rich culture and history, once consisted of 55,000 people. Since the horrific massacre of innocent Israelis on October 7th, Houthi leaders have continued to promote explicitly anti-Semitic propaganda, deliberately conflating Israeli policy and Judaism. The Houthi slogan explicitly calls for curses upon the Jews. Today, Jewish prisoner of conscience Libby Marhabi is reportedly the last remaining Jew in Yemen. Christians in Houthi-controlled Yemen likewise cannot worship safely in public and fear public exposure of their religious identity. The same is true for Christians living in areas controlled by the UN-recognized government, where Yemeni law prohibits conversion from Islam to any other religion, including Christianity. It also criminalizes blasphemy and interfaith marriage. In this context, Christian converts throughout the country face severe persecution, including ongoing harassment and fears of arbitrary detention and torture. In Houthi prison, some Christians have been forced to recant their faith under extreme duress. Musheer Al Salam is a survivor of such egregious abuses, and we are grateful for his courage in sharing his story with us today. Christian convert women have been subject to physical beatings and brutalization. Houthi security guards have threatened female detainees with violence against their children and families. Huda Al Obeid is a survivor of these abuses, and we applaud her courage in sharing her story with us today as well. Huda's experience reflects the Houthi movement's broader persecution of Yemeni women and girls on religious grounds. This ongoing issue has escalated severely in the past year, with the Houthis' Maram, or male escort requirement. This policy, justified on religious grounds, mandates all women in Houthi-controlled areas, including non-Yemenis, to always be accompanied by a man while traveling. Women face other religiously grounded restrictions in Yemen, including limited access to healthcare and segregation from men in public spaces. The Houthis have forcibly closed businesses that cater exclusively to women. Last summer, they began enforcing a new gender segregation policy at Sana'a University that limits women's access to the campus. These restrictions seriously undermine the credibility of the Houthis' commitment to a sustainable political agreement and is deeply damaging a country with a millennia-long history of religious diversity. Each year since 2018, and most recently in December 2023, the U.S. State Department has designated the Houthis as an entity of particular concern, or EPC. Likewise, USCIRF has recommended the Houthis be designated as an EPC every year since 2019. As leaders of conscience gather in Geneva to discuss urgent human rights issues, we should look to international standards to guide how we address the dire religious freedom situation in Yemen. This should include elevating the principles outlined in the UN Human Rights Council's Resolution 1618 for combating intolerance and discrimination based on religion or belief. Interfaith dialogue, education, and counter speech should be used to remediate the intolerance spread from the Houthis' continued targeting of religious minorities. Thank you again to the organizers for hosting this event and for inviting me. I really wish I could have been there with you in person, and I urge you to look for ways to strengthen this coalition to find new ideas and solutions that can help religious minorities and women in Yemen. Thank you.
I want to thank Susie Gelman for her contribution. We want to quickly move on to the next speaker, which is online, Mr. Musheer. And Mr. Musheer is a Christian convert pastor and former religious prisoner of conscience for 4 years in Yemen. He was released in 2021 and he will be joining us virtually and give his statement.
Hello, my name is Musheer. I belong to the Yemeni Christian religious minority. I am a believer and a servant at the church since 25 years. I have been arbitrarily arrested and imprisoned alongside other Yemeni Christians. And we were exiled from Yemen and accused of a number of crimes that carry the death penalty. The problem that we face in Yemen is that in Yemen, we are not recognized as a minority that has the right to practice its faith and considers any other religion an alien faith that needs to be faced by fire and torture, even if it takes bloodshed. A number of articles in the Yemeni constitution guarantee freedom of belief. However, Yemeni legislations do not recognize this right, and the constitution stipulates that it is prohibited to convert from Islam to another religion and considers apostasy a grave crime that carries the death penalty. Being vocal about one's faith is considered a crime and is punishable by imprisonment. Christian minority members face incitement by the Houthi group, and they are constantly labeled as one of the foreign agents or tools by foreign powers against Yemen. There are also other parts and religious political groups in Yemen that consider Yemeni Christians apostasy. We were prevented from employment and religious and freely practicing our religious rights and access to employment and education. We also face discrimination when it comes to distribution of humanitarian aid. The suffering of Christians and members of other minorities is exacerbated by the assumptions from members of the broader Yemeni community, especially concerning women, as they are considered loose women. Through the National Council for Minorities, we have been working recently to promote our rights locally and internationally. However, we faced a number of obstacles, such as not being granted permit to be a legally recognized entity. Among our greatest objectives is to ensure that the legislations uphold freedom of religion and conscience, and to live in a country that protects those rights for all its citizens and subjects. We call upon the international community to support us in this quest and to ensure that religious minorities are involved in the various commissions working in the peace process in Yemen, and also to ensure that religious freedoms is among the top priorities of the discussions and negotiations among the stakeholders. It is important to uphold this right, which was recognized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and to ensure that Yemen is a country that ensures cultural, religious diversity. Our demands are not so complex, but they need to be taken seriously. For us, Christians, Baha'is, and Jews, these rights are such an unattainable dream, and we hope that it will be achieved in Yemen one day. Thank you.
To thank Mr. Musheer for his words, and move on to the next speaker, which is sitting next to me, Mr. Waleed Ayaash. He is the Secretary General of the National Council of Minority in Yemen. He has been for 3.5 years imprisoned in Yemen, and now is living in Luxembourg. And I will hand you the microphone, and please remember that there's both Arabic and English translation on Zoom.
أسعد الله مساءكم بالخير. الشكر الجزيل لمنظمة جوبلي كامبل ولكل
to Jubilee campaign and to all the organizers of this event. I would also like to ask Mrs. Nazila, the Special Rapporteur. My name is Waleed Ayaash. I will speak on behalf of the National Council for Minorities in Yemen, which includes members of Christian, Baha'i, Jewish minorities, and I was selected by those members. Apologies, audio is not inaudible. I have been imprisoned for many years, and I was subjected to torture alongside other Yemenis who chose their own faith. In the end, we were exiled from Yemen against the backdrop of incitement.
تم يعني قبل أن نتلقى النفي من اليمن في ظل تحريض مستمر ضدنا واتهامنا.
We were exiled from Yemen after being antagonized and accusations of apostasy and being foreign agents and defamation and harassment.
فقط لأن ذكرنا إيماننا بأنفسنا دون وصاية من أحد.
This was only because we chose our own faith.
دعونا في هذه اللحظة ننظر إلى الماضي من جهة وإلى المستقبل من جهة أخرى.
Let us look into the past on the one hand and to the future on the other.
حرية الفكر والمعتقد وانعكاساتها على السلام العالمي.
And try to look into the reality of the issue of freedom of thought and belief and its repercussions on world peace and humanity today.
إنما مضى من تاريخ البشرية يشير إلى أن قضية حرية الفكر والمعتقد.
The past history of mankind indicates that freedom of thought and belief has been violated throughout the ages. International laws and covenants, primarily the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, came to restore freedom of thought and belief and to help shape a better, restore religions to their place away from claims of divine right. This is the path for enlightened people according to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, and that this right includes freedom to change one's religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest one's religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. It is important at this stage to bring back the draft International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination and Religious Intolerance, to bring it back for discussion and approval by the United Nations. This agreement was stalled since 1967 and is awaited by millions of oppressed people who are eager for the right to freedom of religion to be recognized. Ladies and gentlemen, we in Yemen are going through difficult and dangerous circumstances with major setbacks and a clear decline in the respect for human rights, including freedom of thought and belief and the rights of minorities, especially since the Houthi terrorist group, which is supported by Iran and classified as a terrorist organization by the United States. Since this group forcibly took control of Yemen in September 2014. The Houthis practiced the worst forms of abuse and terrorism against minorities.
وكان في مقدمة من تعرضوا لانتهاكاتها بهائي اليمن الذين كانوا الأكثر معاناة بتعرضهم للاضطهاد الجماعي.
The Baha'is of Yemen have suffered the most by being subjected to mass persecution and systematic incitement, as well as looting their assets and property and practicing silent genocide against them, in addition to imprisonment and torture against anyone who professes his conversion to the Baha'i faith. It did not end here. I, alongside many others, were eventually exiled. And I was among those who suffered from imprisonment, exile, and torture. This is not something that happened a long time ago. It is still ongoing. The latest of these violations was what occurred in May last year, when 17 Baha'is were kidnapped, including 5 women. 5 persons of this group remain in Houthi prisons to this day, in addition to dozens of Ahmadis and Baha'is from the indigenous Yemeni population, who are still languishing in the Houthi prisons. What raises concern is that these practices against minorities are based on legislations and religious provisions that criminalize conversion from Islam to another religion and prohibit changing one's religion and considers it a serious crime. I would like to mention a number of examples from the types of persecution suffered by members of minorities. This includes failure to recognize the right to choose their own religion and practicing all forms of arbitrary actions against them, against any person who differs in belief and faith. This also includes laying them off and disrupting their livelihoods and closure of licensed institutions and confiscation of their properties, as well as financial harassment and freezing of assets of Baha'is and those who deal with them through the central bank and exchange bureaus, harassing dozens of individuals and families and placing women under house arrest, raiding homes and terrorizing families and children, such as what happened in May last year, as I mentioned before. In addition also to the Ahmadis and before that members of the Jewish community. Also, there are explicit threats of death and terrorizing children by threatening to kill their parents. I was among those threatened with death. Issuing random lists of wanted persons to terrorize anyone who contemplates converting to the Baha'i faith or any faith other than the Houthi belief system. Many families have been forced to change their place of residence several times because of harassment, preventing individuals from the Baha'i group from forming and forming administrative institutions. Systematic and intensive defamation of the adherents of the Baha'i faith, delivering sectarian sermons against Baha'is and inciting the use of violence against them, culminating in the sermon of the Houthi Grand Mufti and the preacher of the Grand Mosque in Sana'a. The greatest danger that the world does not realize currently is this incitement against minorities in Yemen. Imprisonment and persecution against minorities in Yemen is something that the Houthi group practices with complete impunity. However, the members of religious minorities in Yemen will not reciprocate this hatred. We demand effective accountability for all violations and crimes committed in Yemen, and recognizing the right of minorities to international protection. And we call also for the adoption of the International Convention on the elimination of all forms of religious discrimination and intolerance. On the local level, we demand putting pressure on the internationally recognized Yemeni Authority to ratify the Rome Statute, and also in the next phase, pushing for constitutional amendments and enacting legislations that guarantee freedom of thought and belief and equal citizenship, and protects religious and cultural diversity in Yemen, and recognizes coexistence and the rights of religious and ethnic minorities, and the right of every human being to choose his own religion. In conclusion, and through you, I call upon the internationally recognized government to fulfill its obligations towards minorities and to grant the National Council for Minorities in Yemen a license with headquarters in Aden, as it comprises 25% of the indigenous population of Yemen from the Baha'i and Christian and Jewish faiths. Thank you.
Two more speakers, and I'm first going to give the floor to Mr. John Ghanim, who's sitting at my right hand. John was born and raised as a Muslim in Yemen. And by the end of 2017, he met Jesus Christ. He left Islam and was called to be an evangelist. He now leads his own ministry on social media as Christian influencer, reaching so many people around the world for Christ. In the same time, he's receiving many death threats on a daily basis while he lives in exile in the UK. So I give the
so much everyone for having us today, and yeah, thank you so much for this topic. It's very important that to focus about Yemen, because we understand Yemen now at war, and it's been always at war. And myself, my name is John Ghanim. I was born and raised, as he said, in Yemen, and I gave up Islam when I was in Mecca, 2014. And later, 3 years later, I left Yemen and I gave my life to Jesus Christ when I was in Greece as a refugee. And from there, I started to look online. I want to find like Yemeni Christians, but I couldn't find online. So I have that burden and desire to share my faith publicly. So I started to share my faith publicly, and so I started to receive persecution from the first day. And my family disowned me. The imam in my village where I grew up, he divorced my wife from me according to Islamic Sharia law, and they take away my daughters as well. And my family, my mother, they are so under pressure because of the community, because the more I do videos, they receive as well pressure from the community. They want them to stop me, but at the end they rejected me. They disowned me because according to Article 18, everyone has the right to freedom and religion and conscience. So I didn't do anything criminal. I just believed in Jesus Christ, and I want everyone to understand that I am not a threat. I am a human being. I am exist. And I want to tell you today, we are Christian, we are exist, we are Yemeni Christian, we are exist. So thank you so much for today, for you are attended here. And I really call the UN that they have to speak about Yemen, and they have to put pressure upon the government in Yemen to separate Islam or the religion from the state. That's, I think, the only reason that we, as Yemeni Christians or Baha'i or Ahmadi, or we can live together. If the Yemeni government still based on Islam, because I believe and we all believe that Yemeni government based on Islam, and if it stay like that forever, we will never have a church, or we will never have a Baha'i in Yemen. They will still persecute us every day. And even though I changed my name into John when I became Christian, and most of Yemenis, they mock at me. They say bad things against me because of my name, because you are not Yemeni, you just learn Arabic and you pretend. Well, I was born in Yemen. If I am not Yemeni, where I am from? So I am Yemeni, and I am proud to say I am Yemeni, and I am proud to say we are exist. And yes, so I really thank you so much, and I really want you and appeal to you that to speak about Yemen, and we are exist. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Going to the last speaker online. Her name is Huda Al Obeid. Let me quickly. She's a survivor of arbitrary detention and torture at the hands of the Houthi rebels for her Christian faith. Authorities arrested her in 2018, where she spent a year in jail, and she is in exile in Egypt right now. So I give the floor to Huda Al Obeid.
أسعد الله أوقاتكم جميعا بالخير.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the organizers and for all those present online or in person. My name is Huda Obeid, a believer and servant in the Yemeni church since 2015. I was arrested and forcibly disappeared in 2018 for more than a year and 2 months on charges of evangelization and apostasy. and conspiring against the girls of Yemen. Then I was persecuted together with my family until we fled Yemen in 2022. The pivotal role of girls and women in the development of their societies and communities has become clearly visible in most countries of the world, as women are the first educators of the generations, and they are partners in various fields of economic, social, and cultural life. Their participation increases productivity and contributes to progress and prosperity, and the promotion of peace and harmony wherever they enjoy their full rights. Nevertheless, the rights of religious minorities in Yemen remain restricted and subject to derogation and violation. In addition to being subject to legal restrictions and strict measures, with discriminatory elements imposed by the authorities on the members of these minorities. The suffering of the Christian minority has increased under the de facto control of the Houthis, to the extent that the reality of minorities in Yemen has become a terrible tragedy, which has compounded the suffering of Christian women. These women live in isolation, fear, and pain.
التي تشنها السلطة الحوثية عبر
In
مختلف
light of
وسائل الإعلام
incitement and hatred campaigns against religious minorities, which are launched by the Houthi authorities through various media outlets, mosques, cultural events, and social media, these campaigns have affected women and girls of Yemeni minorities, including spreading false rumors and fabricated slanders against them, especially questioning their morals and loyalty to the
المرأة
Buddhist
اليمنية سوءا على
society.
سوء حتى أضحت تعيش في جحيم التمييز والاضطهاد والحرمان والتضييق
Inaudible,
من
excuse
أبسط
me. Women suffer from deprivation of the most basic rights. This caused us, women of the Christian minority and other minorities, to endure double the suffering from exclusion, imprisonment, and torture within Yemen, in addition to forced displacement outside Yemen, as well as deprivation from education, work, participation in decision-making, and the deliberate exclusion from international aid or governmental health and psychological support, especially since there are many women-headed refugee families where the mother, who suffers from the difficulties of solitary life, is also subjected to humiliation, blackmail, and threats in the absence of rule of law and the lack of support and protection. We at the National Council of Minorities in Yemen firmly believe that putting an end to the oppression of women and achieving full gender equality is one of the most important prerequisites for peace that should prevail in our beloved country, Yemen. Women's participation alongside men in all public affairs, including peace negotiations, planning for the future, changing laws, and participating in the government based on merit, in addition to enabling them to reach high levels of education and equal opportunities that they are often denied. Women can make unique contributions to the creation of a fair and cooperative system, as well as harmony, empathy, and humanity that Yemen never enjoyed before in its contemporary times. We appeal and call upon the international community and humanitarian organizations to pay serious attention to the situation of Yemeni women and children of the Christian minorities and other minorities in Yemen or abroad, and that advocacy on their behalf is one of the priorities of humanitarian and human rights work, and to pressure the recognized government to support women of the Christian minority and other minorities in Yemen, and also for refugees outside the country, and to provide support, protection, and education, including psychological care for them and for their children. Thank you very much.
So I want to thank you all, to the speakers, for giving your compelling statements and some of your real-life experiences. We have seven minutes left until 2 o'clock, so we can have a little bit of question and answer time. Also from people who are on Zoom, if they want to have post a question, they can post it in the comment box, and we can share that with the room. But if anybody from the audience has a question to any of the panelists, online or offline. Yes, you, sir.
I'm Christophe from the European Centre for Law and Justice. Thank you all for your interventions. I have a question for Mrs. Ghanea in reference to the suggestion that John made about the solution. He mentioned the separation of religion from the state in Yemen as a solution to enforce religious freedom. As a French, I would say that separation of the church and the state does not solve everything. With your experience, what other solutions would you have, or ways NGOs can act, or other states, other partners, outside of separation of religion of state and state? What actions do you think we can push on to reinforce or to protect or to improve at least religious freedom, generally speaking?
Well, taking from the statements already made by the panelists, not only should women be involved in public life and have equality, obviously they should, and that's very clear. They should be at the peace table. Resolution 1325 emphasizes that and has been active for well over a decade. But also international standards insist that minorities should be involved in questions that concern them. And clearly, transition, peace, stability, rights, equality, dignity are matters that have concerned not only the majority in Yemen, but also minorities. So women are doubly excluded, but actually they should be doubly included. The standards confirm that. Now, is separation the answer? If we look around the world and we look at the models and we assess them according to human rights standards, well, first and foremost, there should never be any discrimination on the basis of religion or belief regarding any right, whether it's housing or occupation or livelihood or security of person. I mean, all international standards have always got a clause that insists on no discrimination on the basis of religion and belief. Separation in some parts of the world has been a constitutional model that doesn't map onto reality, that in practice, political and social forces have deteriorated that model over time. Or the exclusion becomes a strident position against religion. But I certainly agree with John. It doesn't matter about the theoretical models and terminology, but what we do need to insist on is absolutely no discrimination in any sphere of life. The inclusion of minorities, these are special rights according to international law. Minorities have special rights because they are in a non-dominant position and they're numerically in a inferior position, is what international law says. So therefore, there should be a positive effort to include them. What we should ensure is that there is a sufficient disentanglement, that laws, rights, positions of power, inclusion is not compromised, regardless of someone's religion or belief, and communities also should not suffer regardless of that. International law, according to the Human Rights Committee, does not absolutely prohibit a state religion, but if you look at General Comment 22 of the Human Rights Committee, they say that if there is a state religion or ideology, then the burden is on the state to show, to illustrate, to prove that no discrimination is suffered by others. So if you're a secular state, you should prove that religious people, regardless of their religion, are not discriminated in any sphere of life. And if you're a religious state, similarly so. Some of the predecessors, some rapporteurs have said, well, that requires at least some level of separation or disentanglement.
Okay, we're going to take time for one more question. We still have a few more minutes left. If there are any other questions from the audience, online or offline? Because I do have a question to Mr. John, because you are living, your family is still living in Yemen. What do you think? How do you think in 10 years' time it will look like in Yemen?
Well, if Islam still the main power in Yemen, I think Yemen will go to the worst, and we see it like from 1,400 years ago. Yemen, it's always been in the worse war into war, like 10 years after 10 years after 10 new war, and we can see now how they what they are doing in the Red Sea, and how they don't respect human rights. They don't respect the United Nations or Europe or the US or so how we gonna discuss with these people? How? They will never accept Christians or Baha'i or Ahmadi, or the only solution is to have to separate Islam from the constitution of the state.
Maybe the others can answer that question.
Yeah.
How the Minority Council started.
How I don't know if I'm going to be translated, but Mr. Waleed, can you share a short, brief summary of how the Minority Council of Yemen started?
المجلس الوطني هو بدأ بعد الخروج من السجن. كنا موجودين
The National Council
مسيحيين ومجموعة من اليهود ومجموعة من البهائيين. ونتيجة المعاناة وجدنا أنه
Jews and
يوجد لدينا
from our shared suffering,
عن تطلعاتنا في العيش الكريم في المواطنة المتساوية في حرية المعتقد. وجدنا أن المجلس يمثل رافعة حقوقية من خلاله نستطيع أن نطالب بحقوقنا المشروعة، الحقوق التي نصت عليها القوانين الدولية، الحقوق التي أتصور أن المواطنين اليمنيين بشكل عام الطيبين المتعايشين هم كانوا عبر التاريخ متعايشين مع مختلف العقائد، والمجتمع اليمني يحوي العديد من التنوع الثقافي والفكري والديني، ولكن مشكلتنا هي مع المتعصبين الدينيين.
The Yemeni community was always diverse, and there was always coexistence among different elements. But the problem is with people who reject those who differ from them. So we did coordination with internationally recognized
قدمناها
authorities,
للوزارة المختصة
and we
ومرت المدة
submitted
القانونية
the
ولم يتم
necessary
إعطانا الترخيص.
and it was submitted to
أشهرنا المجلس في مارس
competent authorities.
2022.
However, the licensing was not granted.
وبموجب القانون يعتبر بعد مرور مدة الشهرين إذا لم يأتي الرد يعتبر المكون هذا معترف به، لكن لم نمنح الترخيص إلى حد الآن، وهذا ما نحاول ونطلبه من الحكومة المعترف بها أن تمنح المجلس الوطني للأقليات الترخيص. نعم، هو عبارة عن منظمة حقوقية كرافعة حقوقية لحقوق الأقليات والمختلفين دينيا في اليمن، وكذلك المولدين والمهمشين.
This entity is intended to be the voice of those who are marginalized and religious minorities in Yemen.
Yeah, I want to really thank the council for the Minorities Council for your work and your courageous, speaking clearly and openly about what is happening to you as a convert or as a person from a different religion. I do have to say that the time is up, so I will have to conclude this meeting. We will have another meeting at 5 o'clock at the Palais des Nations in room 15, where we host another event, which will be on the topic of human rights in the context of anti-blasphemy and anti-apostasy laws. So it touches upon a lot of things that we have discussed today. This can be attended both online and in person, so feel free to join us. And this room will still be open for informal conversations if you want to speak to any of the panelists or with each other in or outside the rooms. And there are some displays that you can look at. And at 2 o'clock, in this room. Yeah. And at 2:30 in this room, we will have people sharing about Iran. Yeah, so thank you much for coming, and I hope you learned a lot.